not for much or any.
Who's it go through?
She's going to tell. We'll ask Wednesday night.
Okay,
can I have my-
extra loud just for you?
My paper.
First of all, questions, comments, considerations, yelling, screaming, carrying on, fussing, human fighting, and all the other kind of stuff. Mr. James, do we have anybody with us?
We're working on
I don't know yet.
We don't know yet, okay? Mr. Harry, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a comment.
Okay.
Reading in Exodus,
Uh-huh.
where God personally
Yes,
talked to Moses.
yes, face to face.
Well, I don't know about face to face,
Well, that's what it says.
but anyway, what kind of a form, I wonder, did God take?
We have no idea. We have no idea.
He talked about looking at his back and not seeing his face. One verse.
What
Yeah.
did God
Yeah.
look like?
That's amazing. God talks to people directly.
Sometimes,
Still they screwed up.
yeah. Yeah, people, be careful what you ask for, if people would say, boy, it would really be great if God would just come right down here and just talk to me, just give it to me straight, and when that happens in the Bible, the people don't pay no attention to it, they don't pay any more attention to it than they would otherwise, it's like Jesus said. They wouldn't believe it was raised from the dead, which is true, of course. Yeah, that's great. So, that's true. People just don't have any excuse.
That's that same thing. You can't handle it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anybody else? Comment? Of any kind. Okay.
Just 1 second, I'll let you know.
All right. We'll wait just a second. That's okay.
From the airport on, I can't remember Friday or Saturday.
I have
Friday afternoon.
done up some more dates for y'all, and I've tried not to put really screwy ones in here, strange, odd, crazy things. Try and keep them pretty normal, and I'm also not over-explain everything.
And talk to her a while after we get done. She likes to talk to you. Oh, okay. I think anybody but me.
Okay, so
No questions?
no questions. Okay, so the next 4 pages are going to take us from around 500 years before Christ to his birth. So about 500. It's going to cover 461 years altogether. And you'll notice that this takes 4 pages, whereas the first more than 2,500 only took 3 pages. Well, there are 2 reasons for that. One is that, as I mentioned before, the closer you get to current time, the more we are sure of. And so there was a lot of things that happened previous that were not included in those first 3 pages because I couldn't be sure, and really we're not 100% accurate on the dates anyway in a lot of cases. And so they're going to take up more opportunities here on these pages. And the second thing is, too, that I'd like to emphasize, and that is I don't explain every person, I don't explain every incident and all that. I'm really hoping that you will take the initiative if you see a name that you are not familiar with, or a place, or an event that you're not familiar with. I'm hoping that you will do one of 2 things. Either first, you will look it up yourself. Grab your dictionary, grab your encyclopedia at home, or go on the internet and Google it or whatever search engine you like to use, and find out more about it. Or if nothing else, send me an email or bring your question to class here on Sundays or Tuesdays for that matter, and ask about some of these people and places and events. Okay, that's what I'm hoping. Because a lot of this stuff is, I I don't know what you don't know. Okay, I'm not familiar with what you are familiar with. Bruce, did you have a question?
Well, no, I was gonna say, that's exactly what I've been doing every time you give us these
Okay.
timelines. You go home, it's wonderful Sunday afternoon reading, sit with your tablet, just key in the dates.
Yeah,
And it tells you
all
everything.
kinds of things, yeah.
Yeah, there's so much in there.
Okay, so just a couple of things to kind of key in on here. You've got a couple of guys there at the beginning. Pericles, that's how you pronounce his name, Pericles. And he's a real important guy. He's really the guy that turns Athens around. And when we talk about the Greco-Roman world or the Greco-Roman society or Greco-Roman politics, we talk about democracy, representative government. Athens plays a big role, a big part, okay? And Pericles is a big part of that. The other thing, when we talk about Western philosophy, Western society, Socrates is another really big name. And so those are two names. You could look those two guys up and you could read the history of either one of those guys, and that'd take you all afternoon, all day, okay? Because they're both very, very important, and their thinking, their philosophies, their ideas, their concepts, their precepts, their principles are with us today. You can see them in our laws, you can see them in our education, you can see them in our politics today, in many cases. And then I note there Malachi, and that's about 450. I'm not going to pronounce that as a dogmatic fact, but about 450 years before Christ, Malachi dies, and the silent years begin. So when we talk about silent years, you can either mark them from 450, the death of Malachi, until the beginning of John the Baptist preaching. Or, if you're talking about written word, you can start them at about 450, the ending of Malachi, and you can go all the way to probably 40, 50, 60 AD with the first Gospels. We think Matthew and or Mark were probably very close to one or the other, about that time. And so either you can extend the silent years out another, another 50 years or so. But to say that there was 500 years of silence from God to His people is pretty accurate. The Parthenon in Athens is completed. That's a pretty important building. Anybody know what Parthenon means? Not me.
Didn't it have something to do with their main god?
Nope, that's Pantheon. Yeah, Pantheon is a all God building or an all God thinking. Pantheon. Parthenon comes from the Greek word parthenos, and parthenos is the Greek word used for virgin. Okay? So the goddess of Athens was Athena, and Athena was the virgin goddess, right? So that's why her temple is called the Parthenon, okay? Because Parthenos, it's named after the virgin goddess, okay? Athena. The Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesus is this thing right here that looks like it's got a thumb and 3 fingers. This chunk of Greece down here, okay? A thumb and 3 fingers. This is the Peloponnesus. And this is where Sparta is located. You hear about the Spartans, of course, how famous they were. Come back with your shield or not. And the famous 300 up here at Thermopylae and everything. So the Spartans ruled over the Peloponnesus. And the Peloponnesian War was between Athens and Sparta. And Athens' colonies and islands, and Sparta's colonies and islands. Yes, sir?
So just a quick clarification. So prior to Greece becoming one, they were all different kingdoms.
Yes, and Athens and Sparta were just the two biggest or most important. The city-state, that is, a city was a state also, was a nation. City-nation, nation-state, okay? And like the Vatican is today, or San Marino in Italy, or Andorra, or what's the one on the Riviera? Monaco? Monaco on the Riviera. Those are all city-states. They're cities, but they're also countries. That's the way it was in Greece and Rome, real Italy too, at this time of the world. They were city-states, and eventually they banded together or were forced together by war, so that they took up sides together and stuff like that, and that kind of led to nations being created. Here, what did they fight over? Land. They fought over land. They fought over trade routes. They fought over, well, they would say, well, this island belongs to us, and the other guys would say, no. You know, one city-state would land people on one side of an island, and another city-state would land people on the other side of the island, and they would both claim the island for themselves, and then they meet in the middle and have an argument, you know, and stuff like that. So it was mostly over land. Sometimes over grievances of various kinds, but silly. I don't know if you can call them silly, really, but they felt that were important. So anyway, Peloponnesian War goes on for quite a long time. It has kind of fits and starts. In other words, there'll be active periods where the war is very active, back and forth, and there'll be kind of lulls where nothing's going on. Another guy that's real important is Plato. He's born, and you can see between his birth and death, and that's a very important time in Greece. This is the golden age. And you've got guys like Socrates, Plato, later Aristotle, Pericles. This is the golden age of Greece, okay, this period of time. But I wanted to throw in some, non-Western stuff, and so we've got, besides, well, death of Pericles. By the way, with the death of Pericles comes a very famous funeral oration. And if you are reading about Pericles and you come to and it's a highlight or a hyperlink, and it has the funeral oration for Pericles, read that. It's a very good speech. It's one of those speeches in Western history and world history, really, that ranks right up there with, I Have a Dream and Blood, Sweat, and Tears from Churchill, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just really one of those speeches that really, I dare anybody to read that and not kind of get, shivers a little bit. I mean, the guy was great. Okay? Nanda dynasty. Now in India, the subcontinent, what's called subcontinent of India, you had, instead of cities, you had city-states, but you also had dynasties over various numbers of city-states. And the Nanda dynasty is one of the real important ones. Again, if you want to learn a little bit about Indian history, most Americans know nothing about the history of India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Burma, etc. Nothing. They may know a little bit about China, maybe a little bit about Japan, but those other nations in East Asia is just, nobody knows much about. So, Nanda dynasty, you can read about that. It's very helpful. Later, as we go through this, you'll see, we get to the time of the colonization of India, you will begin to see, both in India and Africa, why that took place. It wasn't just a bunch of mean old white guys looking to enslave people and be mean to them. That's not what it was. There was other reasons that the colonies in South America, North America, India, and Africa took place the way they did. And again, most Americans have no clue what's right. And they get very easily brought in then to Black Lives Matter and the Antifa and all this other stuff. Anything that's Caucasian and old and white or whatever is bad, and these are nasty, rotten, disgusting people and all this kind of stuff. There's more to it than that. A lot more to it. Okay? So that's why I put stuff like that in. And then finally, Athens loses the Peloponnesian War. So if you're ever on Jeopardy and you get that question, who lost the Peloponnesian War? Okay? Athens. There you go. The Battle of Cunaxa. This is the beginning of the strife, you might say, between Greece and Persia. This is the kind of the kickoff to a long period of war between these two empires. The execution of Socrates. You remember Socrates was ordered to commit suicide. He was executed by drinking hemlock. And you remember what the charge was that he was convicted on? Very interesting. Nope. Anybody remember the charge that Socrates was convicted of that caused him to be executed? Yes, sir.
Kurt is asking, does pastor mean the funeral
Oration.
that Pericles presents at the end of the Peloponnesian War, or the oration at the
Well, it's the funeral of Pericles.
Pericles?
I think it's Themistocles that gives it. I think I could be wrong, but I believe it's a. Oh, wait a minute. I'll have to check my notes. Where was I? Oh, Socrates. Yeah. Corruption of the youth. He was accused and convicted of corrupting the youth. You know why? He was teaching the youth to question authority. He was teaching the youth to question the gods. He was teaching the youth to question the myths and traditions of their parents. And so he was brought before the council, and he was convicted of corrupting the youth with his newfangled thinking, and therefore ordered to drink hemlock. July 18, 390 BC, the Gauls sack Rome. Sack means they conquer it, take it over, pillage it, loot it, burn it, you name it. Sacking of a city is something you just got to see to believe. It's basically rape, pillage, and burn. Bust in every door, take away people for slavery, steal all their possessions, their money, their jewels, take anything that ain't laid, tied down, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then you've got the birth of Aristotle, of course. Like I said, those guys. Plato comes, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Those are the three biggies. You can read up on those guys. Very important in the philosophy and of the Western world. A lot of the things that we think of today, a lot of the way we think, and the way we act, the way we construct our lives and everything have a lot to do with those three guys. Very much. 367, Licinian is how that's pronounced. Rogations establish equality between patricians and plebeians, nobles and commoners. So the patricians are nobles. You want to draw an arrow from one to the other there, you can do that. And the plebeians are the commoners. Later on, of course, Marx would give them new names, the bourgeois and the proletariat. But it's the same kind of thing. Rogations. What are rogations? Well, we have a Rogate Sunday. Can anybody tell me what Rogate Sunday is? Rogate Sunday is the Sunday around, it's either right before or right after Ascension, I believe. I think it's before. Yeah. Sunday before is Rogate, the Sunday after is Exaudi.
Is it like a gathering?
Huh?
Is it like a gathering?
No. Rogate means prayer. Okay? Or actually the root word means a request of some kind. And so the Licinians made these requests, the rogations, the requests. Okay? This was kind of a party in Rome, and they made these requests of the assembly to grant more equality between the nobles, those who owned land, were senators, they were voters, whatever, and the plebeians, that group that was, we would say, middle class, lower middle class. Very important. This is later. Again, you got to understand your founding fathers of this country and your great thinkers of England at the time of the Revolution. And in that period of time, the 16, 17, 1800s, they were very familiar with these things. They knew these things. They read these things. They memorized these things. And so a lot of these wordings, if you look up the Essenian rogations, you'll read some wordings and go, boy, that really sounds familiar to a lot of Western writing. Philip, that is the father of Alexander, later called the Great, his father, Philip, who was just a common officer. He was really a cavalry officer, is all he was. That's all he was. He wasn't royal blood or anything like that. He usurps the Macedonian crown. In other words, he takes the crown for himself. There was a weak time in the monarchy in Macedonia, and he took advantage of that. And then his son Alexander is born 20 July 356. That's a date that's very, very well known among historians. Soon after that dies Plato. The legend says he died on the same date that he was born, but nobody can prove that, so I didn't bother putting that in. Then, of course, as often happens to usurpers or rebels, they get assassinated. So Alexander's daddy, Philip, is assassinated, and Alexander becomes king in his place. And Alexander then becomes the greatest conqueror ever known. In some ways, greater even than Julius Caesar or Napoleon or Hitler or anybody. I mean, really, if you really compare apples to apples and conquered lands to conquered lands, you really have to say Alexander was the biggie. Nobody really conquered more territory or more peoples than Alexander the Great. He starts by invading Persia. Persia is over here. Here's Greece again and Macedonia. This is where Alexander comes from. He goes across Asia Minor and attacks Persia down here and conquers that. Alexandria in Egypt. Then he turns, after conquering Persia, he turns and goes west and conquers Egypt. This is very important for the Bible story. Okay? Without Alexander conquering Egypt and founding the city of Alexander, we probably would not have a lot of manuscripts of the Bible that we have today. Because he founded the library, or the library was soon founded, I think after his death actually, at Alexander. Greatest library in the world, and many, many, many scripture scholars studied there before it was destroyed by an earthquake. That we won't see until we get into the AD portion of time. So very, very, very important that Greek, and this is important for Jesus too. This is really important for the Gospels. Okay, that Alexander is such a great conqueror that he conquers all the then known world. All right, and everybody learns Greek. Everybody. If you wanted to do business in that world and the next world, really the Roman world too, if you wanted to do business, you had to speak Greek. Which tells us why the Gospels and the Epistles in the New Testament were written in Greek. Because everybody could read Greek. Everybody. Okay? And I mean, even the pagans. Everybody read Greek. So this was really important. This is a good lesson in how history and the things that take place in the world influence greatly the Bible and the spread of the gospel. I mean, there's just this one here, the conquering of Alexander. There's no equal to it as far as influence on the spread of the gospel. Nothing else comes close. And he did it in a very short period of time, and he died very young, which just goes to show you God wanted to use him for a very specific thing, which he used him for, and then that's it. Okay, I'm done with you. Thank you very much. You can go now. That's it. All right. So founded the fall of Susa to Alexander in 331 also. And then he dies in 323, June 11th. He had an orgy the night before, June 10th. Really, he used to love to party. A young guy, he loved to party. You can look in there and see 32 years old, actually. 32 years old. The guy loved to party, and he loved to drink and loved to eat. And he was pretty svelte, you know. He wasn't fat or anything because he liked to work out too. But he really gorged himself, and they think that he got alcohol poisoning, and then went to bed and probably barfed and choked to death on his own barf. That's probably how he died. There are some who said he might have been poisoned, and that's also possible, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever really find out. And then soon after he dies, then Aristotle dies, and really about that time you can say the Greek Golden Age is kind of over. After Aristotle, the Greek Golden Age is done, pretty much. Another thing happens in Rome that's important. Hortensian law establishes the powers of the plebeian assembly. So you had this assembly by the Licinian rogations. You had this assembly that was brought together and allowed to exist and kind of give. Think of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in England. Okay, House of Lords. This is the Senate. This is the rich people, basically the landed gentry. Their meeting, okay, and the plebeians are granted assembly, but they're at first it's the House of Commons just kind of advises or not even advises, just kind of makes requests, if you will, to the House of Lords, and the House of Lords then decides. It used to be in the old days that the House of Lords would decide against something, that was it, it wouldn't go anywhere. Okay? And so it was the House of Lords very often that stopped reform to happen in England. Okay? During the time of Victoria and then before that. It was House of Lords who had a great deal of power. Today they have very little power. There's very few things that the House of Lords can stop. I can't even think of that, but there's a couple of little things that they can. I think they have a lot to say about heredity. They have a lot to say about who can become king and queen and all that stuff. But other than that, they don't have a lot of power. So this in Rome is we're forming now. We formed before the House of Commons, the plebeian assembly. Now here, the plebeian assembly is given more authority, given more power. So this is Republican government. This is the representative democracy now really taking hold 200 years before Christ. That of Ashoka. Ashoka is a great leader in India. Again, you want to keep up with what's going on in India after Nanda. The next is Ashoka. So read about Nanda if you want to do that, and then read about Ashoka. And that will help you get a little bit of a grasp on what's going on in the subcontinent. Now we have another famous name, Hannibal. Hannibal, and not Hannibal the cannibal, but Hannibal Barca. Again, kind of a common guy, and works his way up. He's appointed commander-in-chief of the army of Carthage. Carthage is over here in North Africa. All right, it's a little over further this way, but it's on the coast of north of Africa, kind of where you see Tunisia today. Carthage is right around in there. And things are going to get real busy here in the next couple of pages. Also, we've got the beginning of the Great Wall. A lot of people are surprised by this date. They're surprised that the beginning of the Great Wall was so late. That is, it was not back further at BC time. Just 200 years before Christ is when the Great Wall was started. Wow. Yeah. Hannibal crosses the Alps. You've all heard that story, right? So that's when that happened, 218.
Sir?
Yeah.
Why?
Why what?
Crosses the Alps to get to Rome. He's south of Rome. Why
Yeah.
would he go north?
Because you can't attack Rome this way. There's no way.
Oh, so they landed in France.
Rome owned the seas here. The Navy.
Okay.
And you could attack Sicily.
Right.
And then, but then you'd have to fight your way all the way. Now, if you went to Spain, see, the Roman legions in Spain were much smaller and spread out. So you could go to Spain over here and go around Spain, come through France, cross the Alps and come down, and they wouldn't expect you coming that way.
Right, so there's no arms.
Right, and so you could take Rome from the rear.
I could never understand why they did that.
Yeah, now you know.
Also, he was a great, the supply chain, the industry.
Yeah. Okay, you've heard probably of the Han Dynasty, and so now you know when that was, and Confucianism spreads throughout the country. Confucianism was around for a long time, didn't get very far, didn't really influence until an emperor, the first Han emperor, really embraced it, and that's when it took off. Very important, this next one. 19 October 202 BC, the Battle of Zama in Tunisia. Carthage is defeated by Roman general Publius Scipio. That's how you say his name, Scipio. Later honored with the title Africanus. It ends the Second Punic War. These wars between Carthage and Rome are called Punic Wars. There were 4 of them. First, second, third, fourth Punic Wars. Okay? And they're very important in the history of the development of the West. And this one especially, the Battle of Zama. Okay? Who's seen the movie Gladiator? Okay? If you've seen the movie Gladiator, this is the battle where Maximus then turns the tide and beats the Romans, and the emperor leans over to his guy and says, "Hey, didn't we win this battle?" This is it. This is the battle. And when you hear the announcer guy say, "And the forces of Scipio Africanus," that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the Battle of Zama in North Africa. And also, if you've seen the movie Patton, you know that George C. Scott goes out, he turns the Jeep and he goes out into the middle of the nowhere, and he stands here and he says, "Oh, the elephants were over here and this was over here and these guys with it." He was talking about the Battle of Zama. So very famous battle. This battle is redone all the time by classical scholar people. But he loses, and so he goes into exile. And he winds up in Bithynia, Hannibal does, and commits suicide. A few years later, the Maccabees recaptured Jerusalem. They have captured it from the Syrians. I didn't bother putting that in there because you can just say, well, Alexander conquered everything from India to Morocco. Pretty much. And so, anyway, that's what it is. Rome obliterates Carthage, the end of the three Punic Wars, third and last Punic War. This is where the Romans salt the ground and then plow under the salt, so to this day, nothing can grow. If you go to the ruins of Carthage, I don't even think weeds grow there still to this day. So that's what they would do when they really mad at somebody. They really wanted to wipe them out of the face of the earth and say, "You're never coming back here again."
Sir?
Yeah.
When was the first Punic War?
Oh, let me see.
Is that in here?
I don't think so. It was a very kind of a
Short one?
Yeah, it wasn't no big deal.
Okay.
They decided not to put it in here. They didn't have any famous battles. Here's another thing. Gaius Marius. Gaius Marius is a real important guy, and he's elected consul of Rome. Now notice the spelling here. Not council, but council. This is when Rome did not have an important king. Again, it wasn't a monarchy at this time, it was a republic. And so the people who ran the republic, we would call them presidents or prime ministers, they were called consuls. He would serve 7 times at all. Sometime when we've got more time, I can go into a little bit more about what consuls did and how long they served. It was a very unique situation. You hear Washington, for example, as the first Western ruler to step down from power, George Washington. Okay? Kings did not usually abdicate. Kings did not usually step down from power. And Washington was considered by all the monarchies of Europe as a king. And when he finished his second term and said, "Oh, I'm going back to Mount Vernon and go farming," Europe was shocked. Europe thought, no, he's going to continue to be king, and then his son or stepson or whatever will be king, and so on and so forth. And that's not what happened. Councils were like that. Councils solely served for a period of time, and they rotated. And so one guy did not stay in power for a long time. That's the Roman Republic was much improved than our republic in that sense.
It says 7 times. Does that mean 7 years or what?
No, 7 separate times. So he stepped down for a while, and then he would be appointed again as consul. He would step down for a while, and then he would be appointed again as consul.
Wow.
Yeah, imagine? Yeah. Then again, 12th of July, 100, very important date, real important date, the birth of Gaius Julius, later to be known as Julius Caesar. Caesar was a nickname he obtained due to the fact that he had killed an elephant during the battle of the last of the Punic Wars. Hazai, or Sazai, means elephant in the Moorish language of North Africa.
Overturned.
So there's a little bit of knowledge. I bet you nobody in here knows that the word Caesar comes from elephant.
Big guy.
Yeah. Another name that you can really read a lot about, famous guy, Lucius Cornelius Sulla becomes consul of Rome. And Marius and Sulla go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for years. They're opponents. If you remember the movie Spartacus, these two guys are in that movie, and they're always maneuvering against one another. Marius and Sulla. I forget which actor plays which. 81, the Roman Senate appoints Sulla as dictator of Rome. Now, you might think that's kind of funny for the Senate to appoint somebody and call him dictator. But that word does not have a negative connotation at this time. Okay? The actual title being Legibius Facidius ex Republicae Constitutatae Causa, meaning dictator for the making of laws and for the settling of the Constitution. The Assembly of the People also ratified the decision with no set limit on his time in office. The term dictator soon took on a terrible new meaning due to many of Sulla's heroic acts. So, before Sulla, the word dictator was an okay word. If you were appointed dictator, that just means you were the guy to make the final decision on stuff, constitutional questions. That's all. That's all it meant. It didn't mean anything else. But Sulla, he really took it to heart. And he did some pretty nasty stuff. You can read about it when you read up on that. Now, 73 comes the revolt of Spartacus, also called the Third Servile War. There are many of these wars, just like there are many civil wars. I can't list them all. If I listed them all, this would be 7 pages long. Okay? But Spartacus was important because it was the most successful slave revolt. And it caused a lot of things to be done differently, both positive and negative after. Julius Caesar becomes leader of the Populares, or the popular party in Rome. The name he's elected is Pontifex Maximus of Rome. By the way, the term Pontifex Maximus is the term used by the Pope to this day. Anybody know what it means? It means the Great Bridge. You know what a pontoon bridge is, right? Okay? Pontifex means that. Okay? It's a bridge. Maximus means the greatest, or the best, or the largest, or the longest, or the most important. Okay? So by Julius Caesar being elected as Pontifex Maximus means he was the mediator between the entire people of Rome and the gods. He was the bridge, the human bridge between man and God. That's pretty high order. That's pretty high order. So the Pope today claims that same title, and is called that same title because it claims to be the vicar of Christ on earth, or the great bridge between man and God. Now you know the rest of that story.
Mhm.
Pompey, General Pompey, great leader, captures Jerusalem. Judea becomes part of the Roman Empire. Big time, boy. I mean, without the Romans in Rome, do you have the crucifixion? I don't know. I mean, without the Romans in Jerusalem? I don't know. Another big happening in the history of Rome, the first triumvirate, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Again, Crassus shows up in the movie Spartacus. You see him. I think Crassus is played by that rotund fellow. What's his name? Shoot. I can't think of his name. I can see it just clear like see you, but I can't think of his name. Don't come. Caesar's first invasion of Britain, not important in the sense of history, but not important in the sense of military conquering, because he had to retreat. But important as it leaves a foothold. It leaves a foothold in Britain for Rome, and that's really important for future. Even more important, 10 January 49. Really important, big time. I mean, this one you write in letters 20 stories high. This is huge. This is gigantic. Okay? Caesar crosses the Rubicon River with his army. Civil war begins. There was a law in Rome that no Roman general could cross the Rubicon with his legions. In other words, if you wanted to visit Rome, you were a Roman general, and you were coming back from campaign, and you had your legion behind you, you had to leave your legion on the shore on the other side of the Rubicon, and then come into Rome by yourself, or maybe with a few guards. You couldn't bring your legion with you. That was an ancient law. I mean, we're talking hundreds of years that law is in force. And anybody who did so was to be executed. Caesar not only crossed the Rubicon, he brought all his legions with him. And he did it on purpose. And you know what he said right before he stepped his horse's hooves into the water of the Rubicon? He turned to one of his associates and said, "The die is cast." Big Latin, of course. So if you ever want to know where that term comes from, the die is cast, now you know. It was said by Julius Caesar as he crossed the Rubicon River, because basically, and you know what that means? It's not die like in a metal die.
Plan, layout.
Huh?
The plan, the layout.
No. Die as in dice. Yeah.
Okay.
The dice is, in other words, Caesar was saying, I'm taking a gamble here. And it may pay off and it may not pay off. And so, it's 50-50 chance. The die is cast. Okay? Roll them and weep, you know? Read them and weep. So that's what he did. All right. But now you know where that little term comes from. So Civil War begins. Caesar establishes a 365-day year with a leap year every 4th year. Sound familiar? Yeah. As a result of this reform, the year 46 BCE was 445 days long in order to bring the calendars back in line with the sun. In 45 BC, 21 April, the Roman Senate declared Julius Caesar as dictator perpetuus, the dictator for life. Also declared him patre, father of the fatherland, praefectus moral, prefect of morals, that is the official censor. However, he does refuse the title of Rex, or king, proclaiming Rem Republicam Sum, I am the Republic. Man, kind of an arrogant character. And because of that, he is assassinated on the Ides of March, 44 BC. Assassinated by 60 Roman senators led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, two of Caesar's closest friends and allies. They set him up and stabbed him literally in the back. You want to know where that phrase comes from, stabbed in the back? Here you are. Who needs enemies? That's right. 43, the Roman Senate creates the second triumvirate of Mark Antony. You may remember that name, right? Gaius Octavian, who becomes Augustus.
Do we know the
And
reason
Marcus
why?
Lepidus. Huh?
Do we know the reason why his two closest friends killed Caesar?
Because they thought he was crazy.
They thought he was
gone
crazy.
out of his skull, brain, yeah. And they were afraid of his power. And so they thought they'd do the country a favor and get rid of it. Yeah. Then a really big one. I know I keep saying that, but these are really big, you guys. 2 September 31, the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated by those of Octavian or Augustus at the Battle of Actium on the western coast of Greece. It was mainly a naval battle, and Cleopatra ran for home. With Mark Antony and Patrol, and they died soon after. This is, of course, this is the pinnacle of the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, where they die soon after. It's a real big deal. I could have gone into all the stuff with Cleopatra, but really, in the grand scheme of things, she's really kind of a minor player. She really isn't a big time person. And then that causes, then on 27 January, the door of the Temple of Janus are closed. Rome is officially at peace. This begins what's called the Peace of Rome. Okay? Soon after this, the Senate confers the title First Citizen, and Augustus, on Octavian, he becomes de facto the first true emperor of Rome. Julius Caesar wasn't really emperor. I mean, he declared himself emperor, but he was like killed the next day, so it didn't really count. 23, reform of Augustus. And the reason I put this in here is so you'd have this information for your Bible understanding. Brought the minting of gold and silver coins, aureus and denarius, you've heard that word many times, under his personal control without changing their weight or fineness, that is the percentage of precious metal. The gold aureus, weighing about 1/4 ounce, was worth 25 silver denarii. That's a pretty good. What am I going to say? That's a pretty good price for something. Because silver today is not 25% gold. I don't think it's even close. It's more like 5%, isn't it? Something like that. So for your silver to be 25% of gold, that's pretty good. That means your silver money is worth a lot. Let's see, weighing about 1/7 of an ounce. So when you hear the denarius in the Bible and Jesus or somebody's talking about denarius, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the silver coin, which was much more common than the aureus, the gold coin. 1/7 of an ounce. So it's not maybe a dime or a penny. Also, the sesterces, you've heard, they didn't use sesterces all that much in Judea, but it's another term you hear, Spartacus, Gladiator, and other movies about Rome. Was now minted from about an ounce of orichalcum. I never say that word. The alloy of copper and zinc rather than silver, and fixed at 1/4 of a denarius. This, by the way, is birth of the quarter. So if you ever ask, where does the quarter come from? This is where. Invasions of the Romans up the Elbe River and North Sea. Most German tribes along the Lower Rhine were defeated. New Roman forts established at Haltern on Sea, Dunfen, Haltern, Oberdun, Holsterhausen, Anrecken, and Beckerhausen. Now, I don't know where any of those places are, so I'm guessing they're somewhere by the Elbe River. The Elbe River, I believe, empties into the North Sea. So it flows north. The creation of Magna Germania, Greater Germany, with its capital at Cologne, and more pacification campaigns against the Germanic tribes or Roman legions. This forces many Germanic tribes to flee eastward into what became, guess what? Sudetenland. And this is the historical excuse that Hitler uses to claim the Sudetenland in 1939. And he had history on his side. He was right.
Yet he became friends with Italy.
Yeah.
We better not tell some people that.
I know. Well, he wasn't right about a lot, but he was right about this. And then finally, the last thing before, in the BC era, 4 or 5, 25 December, the birth of Jesus Nazareth, Bethlehem, etc. Why these years are chosen as a possible birth of Jesus? We've been over this many times in the past when we've been talking about Christmas. I'm not going to go over it again. If you want to say as late as 6, that's fine. You've got, there's a lot of good arguments to be made for 6 BC as the birth of Jesus. Also 5, also 4. I don't think you can find a single scholar today who goes after 4. I think 4 is as close as you're going to get to 0 or 1. Okay? So note there's no 1, there's no 0 in history. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the Jews. We've got about 20 minutes. Maybe it's not finished, we can get to it. All right. We were left off at Reform Judaism. Yes. Paragraph 32. Paragraph 32. Reform Judaism, which began as a result of Jewish emancipation in the 19th century Germany and subsequent breakdown of the ghetto laws, attempts to meet the demands of modern life by introducing modifications in traditional Jewish thought and practice. That word modifications, underline that word, that is Reform Judaism. Modification. In other words, or you could even use the word accommodation. And the idea is to accommodate modern time. So a branch of Judaism really said, look, we can't stay stuck in the Middle Ages or 2,000 years ago, back in the days of Christ. We need to move it on. Okay? We need to move it on. We need to be able to order bacon cheese. We need to be able to fit into modern society. And so on and so forth. And so modifications, accommodations to modern society, that's what Reform Judaism is all about. Okay? 33. In the United States, the history of Reform Judaism began in 1824, when 47 members of the congregation Beth Elohim in Charleston, South Carolina, requested reforms in the ritual and the introduction of English prayers in the worship service. So that's one of the first things. Quit talking in Hebrew. Nobody understands it. And we don't want to have to learn it. So let's talk in English. Okay? When the congregation rejected the request, a group of members withdrew and founded a new congregation on November 21st, 1824, and named it the Reformed Society of Israelites. Well, this congregation did not last. Its example led to the creation of others, such as Har Sinai in Baltimore and Emmanuel in New York. Rabbi Isaac Meyer Wise of Cincinnati in 1873 succeeded in uniting a group of congregations to create the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which is a very odd name since they don't use Hebrew much. But anyway, this has become the most liberal branch of Judaism. So if you belong to a Reformed synagogue, anything is up the branch. You can do anything you want. You want to marry a Goyim, you go ahead and marry a Goyim. You want to eat bacon, you go ahead and eat bacon. Worship on Tuesday, go right ahead. Whatever. Wear a skull cap sign, don't want to wear a skull cap sign. Who cares? Very liberal, very whatever. And of course, these congregations are dying faster than any other. Conservative Judaism. 34. Remember that Judaism has no single worldview or any of its divisions. Conservative Jewish congregations constitute autonomous religious communities, each of which elects its own rabbinic and lay leadership. However, the United Synagogue, the umbrella organization of these congregations, elects lay leaders to represent the inner interests of conservative Judaism in national and international forums and to help coordinate and enhance the work of member congregations. Conservative Judaism, which began in the middle of the 19th century, opposes extreme changes in traditional practice, but does permit certain modifications in observance. So you can call the conservatives the middle of the roaders. Okay? They're conservative, they don't like to change, but they will change a few things push. 35. The conservative movement in the U.S. began as a reaction against the radical stand of the Reform rabbis at the Pittsburgh Conference in 1885. Rabbi Salvador Moraes, leader of the dissenting group, helped organize the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in 1886. Very important place today, by the way. 36. It was, however, Solomon Schechter, called to lead the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1902, who became the acknowledged leader and spokesman of conservative Judaism. In 1935, a number of students and followers of Mordecai Kaplan's views initiated the Reconstructionist movement, an even more reactionary ultra-conservative movement. 37. The United Synagogue of America has established a number of auxiliary organizations, such as the Women's League of the United Synagogue, established in 1918, now called the Women's League for Conservative Judaism. The United Synagogue Luke, successor to the Young People's League of the United Synagogue. The Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, in 1929. The Jewish Theological Seminary, founded in 1866, is the major conservative rabbinical school and has satellite units around the country. The Rabbinical Assembly began as an alumni association, but now includes conservative rabbis who are not graduates. Professional organizations closely linked to the United Synagogue include the Jewish Educators Assembly, the National Association of Synagogue Administrators, and the Jewish Youth Directors Association. Moving on. Reconstructionist Judaism. First, paragraph 38. Reconstructionist Judaism traces its beginning to 1920. Mordecai Kaplan established an experimental synagogue in New York City, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. Reconstructionist Judaism arose as a response to the climate of naturalism and functionalism in American thought. It existed mainly as a school of thought in the 1920s and 30s. Professor Kaplan served as a teacher of philosophy and conservative religion at the Conservative Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and great influence over his disciples. In 1935, the biweekly Reconstructionist magazine was launched, and in 1940, the Jewish Reconstructionist Foundation was established to disseminate Reconstructionist ideology. This was followed in 1951 by the establishment of the Reconstructionist Federation of Congregations and Fellowships, of which individual local orientations became a part. All of this, folks, just has to do with reaction to liberalism. So the conservatives reacted to the Reform Jews, but some of the conservatives said, you haven't reacted enough. In other words, you haven't gone back far enough, you haven't maintained enough traditions, you haven't maintained enough of our customs, and so we're going to reconstruct ancient Judaism in the modern world. So think of it that way. Think of it as and it's not like this is, it's not as in Protestantism and even in Romanism, you have conservatives and liberals branching off at the same time. This is not like that. In Judaism, the main group is liberal, and you have conservative groups not just branching off, but going back. You want to go back to the foundations of Judaism. So it's a little bit different kind of movement. 39. Reconstructionism defines Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. So it's evolving, but it's evolving in discovering how to be more Jewish, I guess you could say. The religious values and culture of Judaism are the outgrowth of the historical experience of the Jews. And so they're very, very focused on what happened to the Jews in the days of the Maccabees, days of Caesar, the days of Alexander the Great, the days of Jesus, the Middle Ages, and so on and so forth. The idea of God is rooted in human experience and has gone through various stages of development and continues to do so. The sacred scriptures reveal the search of the Jewish people as leaders and prophets for the meaning of God in human life. So in that sense, it's much more modern. The ancient Jews could care less about the meaning of God in daily life. They knew it, they saw it, and it didn't affect them that much. These guys want it's experiential, okay? So it's more based on feelings and that kind of thing. So in that case, in that sense, it's a modern type movement. Human beings are free. There is no doctrine of original sin. in Reconstructionist Judaism. Together with other groups in Judaism, they affirm that all humans are basically good. This, of course, was tested to the extreme in Germany during the Second World War. But many Jews wrote during that time, we must maintain that all humans are basically good, even in the face of the Holocaust. Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism is that which subscribes to the belief in the divine revelation of the Torah and its principles through Moses, and insists upon strict adherence. That's the word you underline here. Strict. To these laws as codified in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and their application to contemporary life as interpreted by leading rabbinic authorities. The majority of Orthodox Jews are organized locally rather than nationally. However, the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations represents about 1,000 member congregations and was founded in New York City in 1898. Among other Orthodox institutions are Yeshivas Seminary of Torah Study, including the Isaac Elkanan Theological Seminary and Yeshiva University, the Hebrew Theological College in Chicago, the New Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore, Yeshiva Torah Adav, and Chaim Berlin in New York. Orthodox rabbis are represented by the Rabbinical Alliance of America, the Rabbinical Council of America, and other established rabbinical associations. These are the guys in the black coats, and the flat hats, and the long whiskers. Ultra-Orthodox Judaism, the Haredi and Hasidim. The Haredi Judaism, also spelled Haredi with a little, plural, Haradim or Haredim, consists of groups within Orthodox Judaism characterized by strict adherence to halakha, that is Jewish law, and traditions as opposed to modern values and practices. Its members are often referred to as strictly Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox in English. However, the term ultra-Orthodox is considered pejorative by many of its adherents. Haredi Jews regard themselves as the most religiously authentic group of Jews, although this claim is naturally contested by the streams of Jews. 43. Some scholars have suggested that Haredi Judaism is a reaction to societal changes, including female emancipation, and an attempt to halt or limit its trend. This is beyond the black coats and flat hats. This goes then to also keeping women at home, barefoot and pregnant, very little education, and such and such. So it goes kind of just beyond just the man of the synagogue or whatever. It gets into family life very, very intimately. The Haskalah movement derived from the Enlightenment, acculturalization, secularization, religious reform in all its forms, from mild to extreme, the rise of the Jewish national movements, and so on. In contrast to modern Orthodox Judaism, followers of Haredim Judaism are usually uncompromising in their adherence to Jewish law and custom. As a result, they segregate themselves from other parts of society to a great extent. In a sense, in New York, for example, there are blocks of Haredim or Hasidim, which really, you might as well put walls around them. They don't leave. And they're not real kind to people that come in. Unless you have a real good reason. So, even though the walls, physical walls are not there, the mental walls are there. Furthermore, however, many Haredi communities encourage their young people to get a professional degree or establish a business. Furthermore, some Haredi groups, like Chabad Lubavitch, encourage outreach to less observant and unaffiliated Jews, as well as non-Jews. Thus, professional and social relationships can often form between Haredi and non-Haredi Jews, as well as between Haredi Jews and non. So they do happen. Haredi communities are found primarily in Israel, North America, and Western Europe. Their estimated global population numbers over 1.8 million. Due to a virtual absence of interfaith marriage and high birth rate, the Haredi population is growing rapidly. Their numbers have also been boosted by a substantial number of secular Jews adopting the Haredi lifestyle as part of the Baal Tshuva, or Master of Return or Repentance movement, since the 1960s. This is a way for Jews and or non-Jews to become part of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Think of it as adult instruction class in Lutheran Church or confirmation. One more. Hasidism, sometimes spelled Hasidism, is also known as Hasidic Judaism, and a subgroup of Haredi Judaism that arose as a spiritual revival movement in the territory of contemporary Western Ukraine during the 18th century and spread rapidly throughout Eastern Europe. Today, most affiliates reside in Israel and the United States. Hasidi means purity. Israel ben Eliezer, the Baal Sheben Tov, is regarded as its founding father, and his disciples developed and disseminated. Hasidim is noted for its religious and social conservatism and social seclusion. Its members adhere closely to both Orthodox Jewish practice with the movement's own unique emphasis and the tradition of Eastern European Jews. Many of the latter, including various special styles of dress and use of Yiddish language, are nowadays associated almost exclusively with Hasidim. Hasidic thought draws heavily on Uranic Kabbalah, and to this extent is a popularization of the Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, is a special book developed in the Middle Ages and passed down from group to group with all kinds of mystic and secret meanings and symbols and all kinds of other teachings emphasize God's immanence in the universe, the need to connect to and be one with Him at all times, the devotional aspect of religious practice, and the spiritual dimension of corporeality and mundane acts such as eating meals, dressing, work, marriage, and marital union. So their laws go to how you chew your food, how you make love to your wife, how you make a bed, how you set the table, how you clean the dishes, how you put away the dishes. Very detailed minutiae. Many of all of these things, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is supposed to be done, and the order in which it is to be done. Okay? So think of Hasidim as not just ultra, but ultra. Hasidim, the adherents of Hasidimism, are organized independent sects known as courts or dynasties, each headed by its own hereditary leader, the Rebbe. Reverence and submission to the Rebbe are key tenets, as he is considered a spiritual authority with whom the followers must bond to gain closeness to God. The various courts share basic convictions but operate apart and possess unique traits and customs. Affiliation is often retained in families for generations, and being Hasidic is as much a sociological factor, containing as it does birth into a specific community and allegiance to a dynasty of Rebbe's. It is purely religious one. There are several courts with many thousands of member households each, and hundreds of smaller ones. As of 2016, there were over 130 Hasidic households worldwide, about 5% of the global Jewish population. So these guys get into, as I say, the absolute everyday fabric, the intimate details of all life. There is not an area of life that is not commented on and has a law dealing with it. Every bodily function you can think of, every communication between people, especially men and women, family relations, brothers, sisters, mothers, parents, fathers, uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, and so on and so forth, and especially in a Rebbe's family, extremely deep. So, in a way, what I have heard when I've read from people in these groups, they say this is very comforting. You really do not have to figure out everything. I mean, everything from nursing infant you're dying at 100 years old, every breath you take, every step you take, everything you do, is laid out for you in detail in these laws. And you don't have to think about nothing. You are, or put a different way, you're given the freedom or liberty to do nothing but think about the Kabbalah and the Torah and Scripture, and think about God. That's all you do. And that's it. And the women, and that's men, and the women, all they think about is producing as many children as they possibly can, as fast as they possibly can. Well, that's it. Yes.
A few years ago, Rick and I saw part of a program, and I didn't get the name of the Jew. But the men don't work. All they do is study and party in the streets. So women have to do the work and support everybody. Is that part of this group? Okay.
Every group that I've seen of this part is the other way around. Again, all the diamond cutters and that kind of thing.
I've never known Jews to party.
Well, yeah. And
Oh, they were in the streets.
these marriages, about the one time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But no, I've never seen or heard anything like that.
We just thought it was kind of odd.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, we will finish off with Lubavitchers and the strange little black Judaism that was around for a while, and then look at some of the terminology that's listed there. And that will take up most of the next time, I think, and then we'll move on. The next one to study, by the way, is the beginning of the Christian church, since we've done away with all the other religions. So we'll pick up with the early Christian church, and that's about 600 years worth. And then after that, we do Roman church. And that will take a long time. So we won't probably get to the Protestants until summertime, maybe? Next fall? All right, let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God,